Now, sometimes issues can occur with triangulation, especially in game engines like Unity. I've noticed this issue. On really long stretched triangulations, sometimes you get these weird artifacts that occur. And I found the best solution is to try to cut these n-gons into smaller increments, and that will basically fix the issue. So what I like to do is go to the bigger pieces, like this one for example, and notice how we have a really long stretched triangulation. And actually, I think I'm on a different file, so let me just re-triangulate everything real quick. I opened up a new file before this video, so triangulate, keep normals, select everything, Control C, and then copy that triangulate. Okay, awesome. So let's go back to this piece. Now notice we have a pretty long triangle right here. Now this is probably okay, but what I like to do is split these up into smaller portions. The way you can do this is by simply adding in a loop cut here, maybe 2, and what's going to happen is Blender is going to recalculate where those triangles connect to. You're going to see they're a lot smaller now. Now since I can't actually add a loop all the way through because we have an n-gon, what I could do instead is simply use box cutter, set to knife, and then just kind of cut through like this, maybe a little bit further in, like that. And you're going to see these triangles are now a little bit more split up, which is kind of what I'm going for. So this is just personal preference. This is what I like to do, especially on these really long stretched areas. Let's check this one. This one isn't too bad, but what I could do is, do another cut inside of there. Now it's a bit more reasonable. So I wouldn't stress too much about this process. This is just something I like to do personally. I found that I tend to get some better results that way. But overall, most of this is fine. Maybe right here on this piece, what I could do is something like that. Super easy, nothing complicated, but really I'm only worried about these really long stretched areas, but we don't have too many of those. Let me check this one. This one is a bit long, I suppose, so maybe what we could do is something like that, or maybe even just something like this. There we go, cool. So I'd recommend doing that. It's always a good idea, and you're probably not going to run into any issues if you take that approach. Alright, in this video, or section rather, I want to talk about triangulation. So as part of our MAD-T workflow, we do modeling, automation, decimation, and now we're on triangulation. Now you're probably wondering why exactly we have to do this. Now if you had a perfect quad-based mesh with clean edge flow and everything was going for you there, you don't need to add a triangulate modifier because those types of meshes will naturally triangulate. Let me show you what I mean. So this mesh right here is all made out of quads, and you're going to see if I triangulate it, it just kind of naturally triangulates everything together. All it has to do is connect one point to another, right? Super easy. So you're not going to have any issues if your mesh is made out of perfect, set to quads and good edge flow. Now, in most hard surface models, since we're using a Boolean workflow, we're not going to have, a perfect quad-based mesh. We're going to have n-gons, and that's fine. But if we want to use the n-gons in a different software, Marmoset for baking, or maybe Substance Painter or a game engine, we want to make sure that the mesh is properly triangulated beforehand. That's the only way we're going to be able to effectively use these n-gons in here without having to retopologize everything. Now fortunately for us, this is an extremely easy process. All we have to do is add a triangulate modifier in Blender. Now before we do that, let me show you exactly what would happen if we just exported our mesh as is. Alright, so I'm going to be showing you Marmoset and Substance Painter and things like that later on, but for right now I just kind of want you to watch this part. So notice that when I exported the gun as is, we have a lot of problems. We have collapsed geometry right here. We have collapsed geo here. There's like a mess, some weird issues here. Issues on the front. The front of this barrel's all collapsed. You get the idea. There's a lot of issues with this, and a lot of people wonder why this occurs. Now let me show you what would happen if I added a triangulate modifier to everything. So the way we triangulate our mesh is super easy. Go to one piece of your mesh, it doesn't matter which one. Just select it, add a triangulate modifier, and make sure this keep normals option is ticked on. Reason being is because if you don't turn it on, you might get some weird shading issues, so just tick that on like that. And then what we need to do is go up here to edit preferences and make sure the copy attributes add-on is turned on. So now what we can do is select everything with the A key, Control C, copy selected modifiers, and then triangulate, and then click OK. And now everything here is going to be triangulated. Now let me go ahead and export this again, and now let's see how it looks inside of Marmoset. So I just exported it, and if we hop back into Marmoset, you're going to see everything is completely fixed. That is all we had to do. So it's a very easy process. When you have n-gons in your mesh, you definitely want to make sure you add a triangulate modifier. It's going to sort out these issues. Now there is a bit more to it. Sometimes issues can occur, and I'm going to discuss that in the next video. Alright, so we've completely finished the MAD-T workflow. So I'm going to keep repeating it because it's really needs to stay in your head. Modeling, automation, decimation, and triangulation. That's all done. Now at this point is where you kind of have like a divergence. You can choose different paths you might want to take. Now what I usually do is I design the high poly, which we have the high poly weapon, and then we decimate it down to the low poly. That's what you're going to do like 99% of the time. That's why we have a decimation section. So generally what you want to do in those cases is you're going to want to bake the detail from the high poly to the low poly. Now I'm sure most of you know what baking means if you're taking this course, but in the case you don't, I'll quickly explain it. Baking is basically the process of taking the details from a high poly and think of it as pasting them on the low poly without increasing the poly count. Now most people when they say baking or hear baking, they think of normal maps. And basically that's what I just explained there. So you take the detail from the high poly, think of it as pasting that detail onto the low poly, but it doesn't increase the poly count. It's basically an illusion of detail. It looks like it's there, but it's really not. It's a lighting trick. Now we can also bake other things such as ambient occlusion maps, curvature maps, height maps. There's all sorts of things you can bake, and that's all going to be discussed a bit later, so it'll make more sense. Even if you already know what all this means, I'm still going to kind of re-emphasize it to make it make even more sense. But for right now, what we want to do is bake the detail from the high poly to the low poly. Now, a lot of people ask me, why don't you bake in Blender? And the simple answer is Blender's baking system is awful. It works, but you're going to get very, very subpar results. It's like if you're trying to drive down the street and you break down 3 times. It's just maybe not that bad, but pretty bad. It's not worth your time. So what I use, you can use any of these. You can use Substance Painter to bake if you want, or you can use my personal favorite, which is Marmoset Toolbag. Marmoset has arguably the best baking algorithm on the market. So even though you do have to pay a bit of money for that software, you're saving so much time with how efficient and clean those bakes are. I'll also show you how you can bake inside of Substance Painter if you don't want to get Marmoset, but I would highly recommend picking it up if you're serious about getting into game assets. Okay, so this video isn't going to be the tutorial yet. I want to discuss a few things because baking in Marmoset oftentimes will confuse people, and I was even getting confused recording this video because there's always some step I forget to do because there's a lot of steps. So the first thing I want to discuss is how Marmoset actually reads the name of the model. Alright, so if you take a look here, you're going to see the low poly has basically pretty crappy names here. It's like box piece 002, cube 002, these names are pretty awful. So what would happen if even though we have a triangulate modifier, what would happen if I tried to export it and load it into Marmoset? Let's give it a try. Now it's very important when you export your models that you have the underscore low or the underscore high suffix. So what I usually do is I export it as an FBX, and with everything selected, in this case the low poly, I'm just going to call this gun underscore low. So usually what I would do is I would go to, selected objects because I only want to export what I have selected, and I'll just call this gun underscore low. Cool. And I'm just going to do the same thing for the high poly. We'll go in here and select everything, and we're just going to call this one gun underscore high, and this is the exact naming convention you should be using. Okay, so we're going to export it and load it into Marmoset. Now I'll show you how Marmoset works in a separate video. For right now I'm just going to kind of speed through this process because I want you to understand what happens. So what I'm going to do is go to my, where is it? Here it is. I'm going to open this, and you're going to see when I try to open these models, nothing happens and nothing appears. And this is where I used to get tripped up and where a lot of people they're like, what the heck happened? I did everything correctly, but it's not loading in. That's because although Marmoset reads the FBX files, it also reads the name of the contents of your model. What I mean by this, let me open up the one we were at before. Not this one here. What I mean is Marmoset is going to read the names of these pieces in here, okay? Now Marmoset will only read them properly and load them in if they end in the _low suffix. So very, very important. That's why they're not loading into Marmoset. So it's very easy to fix. Let me go back to the low poly first. Very easy to fix. You basically just select everything. You can press Control F2. And what I like to do is just make like a base name. So you can go to set name. And I'm just going to call this name. Make sure you're set to new. We'll do suffix in a second. Set this to new. And I'm just going to call this gun, okay? Really easy. We'll click OK. And you're going to see everything gets renamed to gun. And it's just going to append a number to it. So 1, 2, 3, and so on, right? Now what we want to do is also make sure that the suffix ends in _low, and that's how it's actually going to load into Marmoset properly. So I'm just going to press Control F2 again, change this to suffix, and I'm just going to call this one _low, okay? And you're going to see now that will append a suffix that says _low to the weapon. So I'm going to go ahead and export this again. We can just overwrite the old file right here, and I'm going to do the same exact thing to the high poly here. So we'll just select everything. We're going to rename it, so Control F2. I'm going to set a new name. We'll call this one gun once again, and then Control F2 one more time. Go to suffix, and this time we're going to do _high. And there we go. So now this should load properly into Marmoset. I'm going to go ahead and export this, overwrite this one. And then if I go back into Marmoset, everything's going to just magically appear. Pretty cool, right? So that's basically how you get things to load into Marmoset. You have to make sure that it actually ends in _high for the high poly and _low for the low poly. Now that's step number 1. Step number 2 is there's going to be issues if we try to bake this. I'm going to quickly show you that as well. So once again, I'm going to show you all of Marmoset, but for right now, I'm just going to quickly set up the baking. So I'll just do like a basic 2K bake, normal map, that's fine. And what I'm going to do is quickly try to bake this. So just bake this as a PNG and just give it a second. Depending on your system, it might take a few seconds to a few minutes. And you're going to see it tried to bake, but we got an absolutely terrible result. And this is where the second area where a lot of people get confused, because this is where it can get very, very frustrating, where the bake simply doesn't work. And I'm going to explain to you why this occurs. What Marmoset is trying to do is it's trying to take the pieces of the high poly and bake it to the pieces of the low poly. So for example, let's select, I don't know, this base piece right here that says Valkyr. And I'll press the period key on the numpad to zoom in on that. You're going to see this one is called gun 003 _high, but if I select the same one in the low poly version, you're going to see this one's called gun 002 _low. So it's not baking properly because these numbers don't match. Each piece of the high poly and low poly must have identical names. The only thing that's different is going to be the suffix. So how do we do that? Well, there's a few different ways. What I like to do is join different pieces of the mesh together. I can get into a lot more of this. If this is like a first-person shooter and you needed physically separate pieces for like a reloading animation or something, those might be different areas you join together separately. Some people might want to join the entire mesh together, which is fine. Some people might want to split it into different pieces. It doesn't matter too much. That kind of depends on your own workflow and what you need to do with the model. But for demonstration purposes here, what I think I'm going to do is maybe join all these pieces together, like the back pieces, the barrels, the scope, and things like that. And once all of that is joined together, we can rename everything to make sure it corresponds perfectly. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I would highly recommend making a separate Blender save because we will be applying all the modifiers, and if we want to change something, we want to have a backup file. So just go to File and Save a Copy. Or if you want, you could use Power Save, which will do that for you. And it's just going to append a number to it. Okay, cool. So the first thing we need to do is kind of choose what parts we want to join together. So for example, I might just join this back part together. Let me hide this empty. So I'm just going to box select this back part right here. And I'm going to join everything together. Now you want to be careful because if you take a look here, these bevels are different sizes. If I go to this piece, for example, this bevel amount is 0.0021. This one is 0.0024. And this one is 0.0024, but like different numbers after it. So what I'm trying to say here is that these bevels are of different sizes. And if you join everything together without applying your modifiers first, what can happen is you can get like a nasty mess when you join everything together. Things might collapse. So for example, if I went to a piece with like a really big bevel like this one, and then I selected everything else and press Ctrl J, it's going to overwrite that amount to everything, in which case things can start going crazy. So this is why I recommend applying all your modifiers first, because once that bevel is baked in, so for example, once I apply this bevel, that bevel's locked in. You can see it's applied there. So then when I join everything together, it's not going to overwrite anything because the bevel modifier has been applied already. Make sense? So we're going to go ahead and undo that real quick. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just once again, select this back part, and I'm going to press Ctrl A, and you can do visual geometry to mesh. What this will do, just apply all the modifiers at once. And just by the way, to let you know, whenever you export, all the modifiers get applied anyways, so we're not really doing anything super crazy here. They're going to get applied regardless. Might as well do it now to help us out. So visual geometry to mesh, and then Ctrl J. And you're going to see we have absolutely zero issues. So what I might do is just hide that for right now. Maybe these bottom pieces right here, I just go into wireframe and kind of box select it. So maybe these bottom pieces, let me deselect this one, B and the middle mouse button. Maybe these could join together, so Control A. And if that's grayed out, make sure you have an active selection so you can just shift click on something. Control A, visual geometry to mesh, and then join everything with Control J. You can hide that. We can maybe do this upper portion now. And then once again, Control A, and then Control J it. And then the scope can be joined together here. Apply everything, and then Control J. Awesome. Cool, so at this point we can go ahead and right click, visibility, show all inside, and we can just start renaming them. So this one, for example, I'll just call this, I don't know, base underscore low, like that. Once again, the name is not what matters here, it's the suffix that matters, but the name does need to be identical for the high poly and the low poly, but the name itself that you choose doesn't matter. It can be independent of the name you choose for the FBX export. Just to clarify that. So we'll call that base underscore low. Maybe this one could be stock underscore low. This one could be like, I don't know, bottom underscore low. And this could be scope underscore low. Easy enough. Now these two pieces are just like not really doing anything. I don't know what these are. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. And then also delete the empties here. We don't need those. Okay. And also we have some random extra items here I can delete out as well. I think, I'm not sure if these are doing anything. I'll just leave them for right now just in case. Okay, so we have four separate pieces here. We have this stock, we have this base, we have the bottom, and then we have the scope. So we're going to do the same exact thing for the high poly, but we're going to keep the names identical except for the suffix. The suffix for the high poly would obviously be underscore high. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hide that and turn this on. Same idea, just going to go ahead, box select this back part, Control A, visual geo to mesh, Control J to join everything together. Can hide that. Make sure you're joining together the same pieces as well. Should be pretty easy because of what we're doing. Okay, so Control A, Control J. The high poly might be a bit laggy because it's a lot of geometry it's working with, so don't stress out about that. And then box select, you know, all these areas. Control A, and then Control J. And then same for here. Control A, and Control J. We're going to do the same exact thing. Just going to rename them. So let me right click visibility, show all inside. So this one's going to be stock underscore high. This one's going to be base underscore high. This one's going to be, let me hide that, bottom underscore high. And this one's going to be scope underscore high. And then we can just go ahead and turn all of that back on. We have some random pieces here that aren't really doing anything, so we'll just delete that out. Okay. And now you're going to see the low poly and the high poly have identical names for the corresponding objects. The only difference is in the suffix. So now we've fixed the issue with the imports not showing by changing the suffixes here. Is that the word? Suffixes? I don't know. And then we've also fixed that baking issue by making sure the naming corresponds between the high and the low poly. Cool, so let's go ahead and try to export these and just see if everything works as intended. I'm just gonna overwrite the old file. So gun underscore high right here. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the low poly. We'll overwrite the old file for gun underscore low. Awesome. So let's see if everything works. Like I said, I'm going to show you Marmoset in a separate video, so I'm going to kind of speed through this part. So let me go into my low and high poly files. I'll quickly set up the baking settings, which will be done in a separate video, like I keep saying. And I'm just going to go ahead and quickly preview this bake, see how it works. So I'll just have to make a new folder here. We'll bake it as a PNG and give it a minute or two to bake. And you're going to see it kind of worked, it kind of didn't. There's a few issues here, like this has kind of collapsed the name. So I think that's just because my high poly wasn't triangulated. I probably pressed Control Z one too many times. So easy fix if you just don't have the triangulate on. Add it, keep normals, copy it over, copy the triangulate over, and then we can just go ahead and Control A everything to apply it. And then we'll just export this one more time and everything should work as expected. And there it is, absolutely no problems. So I think we're about ready to hop into the Marmoset video where I show you how to actually use Marmoset for those of you that want to use this as your preferred baking engine. So I'll see you in the next video. Alright, so now that we've discussed a bit about baking, I think we're ready to hop into Marmoset and discuss exactly how to, well, use the software. I'm also going to show you how to bake inside of Substance Painter. You can not use Marmoset and bake in Substance instead. The results are simply not as clean and not as versatile for decent bakes. So Marmoset's going to be this video, and the next video may or may not be Substance. We'll see. So up here, there's a little bread icon. This means bake. Easy enough, right? So we'll click on that. A lot of these menus are probably intimidating. To be honest, I don't use most of them. What I do is I go to Quick Loader, I go to Load, and then I simply load in the low and high poly files that we exported. So you would just navigate to those and open them. And then if you hold Alt and left mouse button, you can kind of move around like this. And Alt and middle mouse button is for pan. Alt right mouse button is kind of like the zoom in and out feature. And if you hold Shift and right mouse button, you can kind of move around the HDRI lighting. So those are the basic commands. Might take a second to get used to because blenders are different, but it shouldn't take you too long. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to bake the high poly to the low poly. Before we do that, take a look over here. We have an H and we have an L. This simply means high poly, low poly. So we can turn on and off the low poly and on and off the high poly. Easy enough, and you're going to see all the details that the high poly has, and the low poly is going to eventually get those details when we bake it. So what I like to do is I like to change the sample count to 16 and the format to 16 as well. Bakes will take a little bit longer, but this is decent quality, and I found that anything above that is kind of a waste of time because I don't really see much of a difference. Okay, so next what I want to do is I want to bake at my preferred resolution. You could do 2K, you could also do 4K if you prefer that. I'll set it to 4K just because it'll be a bit higher quality. Now in Marmoset, you can bake multiple types of maps here. Normals, curvature, and ambient occlusion are the ones I bake personally. ID maps I do inside of Blender. We'll discuss those in a separate video. So I just recommend turning on normals, curvature, and ambient occlusion. That's going to give you the best results. And that's all we really need for right now. So now what we need to do is go up here to the P button. I'm going to click on preview and click on yes. And then you would basically just add in like a new folder. So you could just add in a new folder and then change this to PNG, and you can rename this if you want. So I could just call it gun. And then if we click on save, it's just going to take a minute or two to bake everything. So just sit back, relax, and let Marmoset do its thing. All right, it should be about done, and you're going to see, I caught that on video, which is awesome. We have a really clean bake here. And this is why I recommend Marmoset, because you're not going to really get bakes this clean in other softwares. And also, if there's issues with your bakes, you can fix them right in Marmoset. So if I kind of pan around here with Alt left mouse button, you're going to see this is a pretty damn good result. Pretty much everywhere is clean, right? Now once you start zooming in and kind of looking in like corners and crevices, you'll begin to see very small, minute issues. These aren't anything major. As a matter of fact, if you go to any video game, you're going to see baking issues. It's just the nature of baking. You'll never get it perfect, but you're going to see we got a pretty damn good result. But there are a few areas where you might have some baking artifacts. A few are okay, but I really like to go in and fix the ones that are a bit more obvious. Now, some people may disagree with me here and just think I'm throwing this out there to be lazy, but what I actually think is a good idea is for minor baking artifacts, sometimes they kind of add this element of realism. Like, for example, these small baking artifacts right here, when you zoom out, they almost look like some wear and tear on the actual object, and I think this can actually be a good thing and a reason to actually leave in some of these artifacts because it almost looks natural. So you don't have to agree with me, but that's kind of the way I think about it. Now there are some issues that you might notice that are a bit more severe, so generally what I do is I kind of zoom in, especially to areas like this, and you'll see some more obvious kind of like baking errors. There's not too many right here. I think that's part of the AO. I'm going to try to find a good example here. I'm actually kind of having trouble finding significant errors, which is a good thing, but I want to show you a pretty cool tool. Right here, for example, it almost looks kind of like skewed in a way, and you'll see what I mean in a second. But basically what you can do is you can navigate to the piece that kind of has this issue. In this case, it would be the stock. So I could go here and click on the low, because this is the low poly version that we baked onto. And there's a pretty awesome feature here called Paint Skew. And this will basically correct the orientation of these pieces. So if I kind of paint this, kind of massage it, look at that. Notice how it kind of pops out a bit more naturally. It's kind of in your face. And that's kind of what I like to do on different baked areas. So I could close that. I could maybe find a different area that has a similar issue. Might be a good idea to try it on this name here because the name's very important. It honestly looks okay as it is. I'm just kind of curious to see how it'll look. We need to change over to the base for this one because that's the base. Paint skew, and then what we could do is kind of massage the letters here. It makes a very small difference, but to me I think it's worth it because these letters are going to pull a lot of attention to the viewer's eyes. So you can kind of paint that, and it's just a bit more clean, as you can see. We could also do that to the other side here because I think we have a name on both sides. So just paint the skew. I'm going to move this off the screen. You can just kind of paint that very carefully. And if you look at this, you'll kind of see like how it updates and where you're painting in. It's basically a black and white map is what's happening. So we can just slowly paint that in. Just make that a bit cleaner. Honestly, I could just do the whole thing. If you're painting on a flat surface and there's nothing on it, nothing's going to really change, as you can see. So yeah, that looks good to me. And you can basically do this everywhere you kind of have these whole type of cutouts. Maybe I could go to the bottom now. Kind of paint that. Same with that one. Kind of annoying to move around in here, but it's okay. Kind of paint that one. It's just a little bit more accurate, as you can see. So I really like to do that. These are the type of features that Substance Painter does not have, which is why I really recommend Marmoset. Now right here, there's some pretty clear baking issues. The way we can fix this is by painting something or adjusting what we call the offset. So what I could do is go to, is this the bottom piece? Yes, it is. I could go to the bottom piece here, click on low, and we could go to paint offset. And what you can do is you can kind of click around here and it's going to slightly adjust this baking cage. And if you just kind of click around here, oftentimes it'll kind of fix those issues. You have to be careful though, because if you go too far, it'll mess up. So you can always hold control to kind of paint it back in. Cool, let's go to the other side and see if there's the same issue over there, which I don't think there is, so that's good. For these little notches down here, you could also try painting the skew again. It's not gonna really do too much in this case, it looks like. I'll just do it anyways, because I'm already kind of in here. Doesn't make too much of a difference in these types of situations, but I guess it does slightly. So that's going to be my challenge to you. Whether you're using this model or whether you're using your own, go around the model, find areas that are kind of skewed, and use that paint skew feature, and also use the paint offset feature to adjust the cage for areas where you have baking artifacts. So that's basically it. Now you're probably wondering what you do once you're done. We don't do anything, because as you're adjusting this, the maps are getting updated in the background. So all you would have to do is to navigate to the folder where you chose that preview option, and your map should be in there. So let's quickly take a look at them. So we have our normal map. Doesn't look too bad. There are some issues that are kind of severe, but those are most likely areas we can't see, because remember, we chopped off part of the low poly and insetted faces and things like that. And we didn't do it over on the high poly, so it doesn't matter because we can't see those areas anyways. So there's the normal map. We also have our ambient occlusion map. These are kind of crazy, but it's basically defining the shadows. And then we also have the curvature map. I'm probably going to rebake the curvature in Substance Painter. I found that the results are a bit better when we bake it in Substance, so it doesn't really matter too much here. So that's it. So your maps are saved. You don't have to do anything additional. I would recommend saving your marmoset file in case you want to come back in, but for now, that's it.